Welcome back to Next Gen Console Watch, our show following all the news and updates on the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. I'm Daemon Hatfield, and as always, I'm joined by Max Scoville, host of IGN's PlayStation podcast, Podcast Beyond.
Hey Damon, how's it going?
Hello, it's going well. And on the Xbox side of things, this week we are joined by Destin Legarie from IGN's Xbox podcast, Podcast Unlocked. Welcome, Destin.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And this week we're kicking off a pair of special episodes. Looking at the year ahead, this week we're talking about what PlayStation needs to do to make 2023 a great year for itself and PlayStation fans. And then next week we'll be looking at what does Xbox have to do to make 2023 a great year for Xbox and its fans. But PlayStation this week, we'll get Max's response and then we'll get sort of Destin's thoughts from the Xbox side of things. So kicking things off, Max, 2023. It's currently actually a little bit quiet for PlayStation in terms of what we know. Next month, they're going to launch PSVR 2. Sometime later in the year, in the fall, we expect Spider-Man 2. And that's it for stuff that we know PlayStation has in store. So, I asked you the question, what do you think, what does PlayStation need to do to make 2023 a great year?
Well, I think for starters, some games would be good. You know, obviously exclusives are all very well and good, but a lot of people bought PlayStation 5s, and there haven't been that many PlayStation 5 exclusives that haven't also come to the various PS4s. And, you know, PS4 support is great, but obviously people with new systems probably want to actually put those to the test and, you know, show off what they can do. So hoping for more of that. Long tail support for PlayStation VR 2 is a huge thing. Obviously, there was a huge attach rate for the first iteration of that. There's a pretty good launch lineup sort of put together for PSVR 2. Obviously, Horizon Call of the Mountain is the big, you know, first party one there. But I really hope they continue that. And, you know, if they're not going to actually drop a bunch of really cool stuff over the course of, you know, the months following launch, at least letting people know what they're getting on board for if they do drop $500 on a brand new expensive virtual reality hat. But yeah, obviously, games. Like we need more games, specifically PlayStation 5 games. PlayStation had a sort of weird couple of years there where they basically showed their entire hand. I think it was, I want to say E3 2018, 16. It was one of those years. But they basically showed off everything. And then we spent the next 5 years after that kind of waiting for all that stuff to come out. And, you know, one of those reveals was the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is only 1/3 of the way out. So, you know, more games, please. Thank you.
Any specific games you think would be important for PlayStation to announce or reveal?
I mean, Naughty Dog stuff is pretty hot right now. The Last of Us on HBO is obviously going to get a lot of people's attention. It's great that we've got part 1 and 2 out there. I hope we get an update on what the multiplayer is. It sounds like they're going to be talking about that sooner than later, but so far we've seen literally 2 pieces of concept art, and it would be nice to know that they're, you know, they've got something new to show off sometime in the foreseeable future. Mm-hmm.
Well, Destin, this console generation has been pretty quiet for Xbox so far. That is expected to change this year. Xbox finds itself in a position where they should have a whole lot of games coming out this year, whereas currently we don't know a lot about what PlayStation has in store. How are you feeling kicking things off in 2023 about how exclusives look on both platforms?
Well, today, funnily enough, Xbox announced that they're having an event on January 25th where they're going to be talking about Redfall, Forza Motorsport, the new Minecraft entry, and what they're going to be doing with Elder Scrolls Online. So Microsoft is going to be talking about Xbox and what they have coming in the near future. Now, on the PlayStation side, don't forget, they have Marvel Spider-Man 2 for this year, in addition to an exclusivity agreement for Final Fantasy 16 on the PlayStation 5. Plus, they have games like Forspoken hitting later in January, not on the same caliber of the 2 that I just mentioned, but still a notable entry coming exclusively to PlayStation 5 for a period of time. They own Destiny 2, and Destiny 2 is about to have their major expansion with Lightfall hitting February 28th. The Horizon Burning Shores is hitting April 19th. God of War Ragnarok announced New Game Plus. And then there's also Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Armored Core 6. Don't forget, Sony invested heavily into From Software. Then there's the shows. There's the Last of Us HBO show that's premiering, I believe, this weekend. There's the Gran Turismo 7 movie, and we know that there's a God of War movie in the works. Sony is really, really smart with how they've divested assets into the movie realm, and everything we're hearing about Last of Us is positive. The Gran Turismo preview recently looked really interesting. And the one thing that Max said was they need to focus on PSVR 2. I can pre-order a PSVR 2 right now if I wanted to. It doesn't seem like there's limited supply. That's going to be a long play, I think. I don't think that's something that they are going to need to worry about too much, because the install base of the original was still just in a few millions, versus the PlayStation 5, which they just announced has sold through 30 million consoles, right? If they were to improve one thing this coming year, I think it has to be their services. And this is the one criticism I've had for Sony for a long time. They need to continue improving PlayStation Plus. They just did this huge revamp, and then we just haven't heard anything. No improvement to their premium tier, no announcements about day one releases, and they saw a huge success with Stray and Annapurna publishing it day one on the extra tier. We need more stuff like that.
Max, do you agree that PlayStation Plus is an area that needs attention from Sony?
I think it could use another revamp. I think the simplicity of Game Pass is really one of its selling points, aside from also like a pretty steady rollout of games. But the fact that you had to specify on the extra tier is, that's a hiccup. Obviously, people who play like really close attention to all this stuff, you can keep track of it just fine. But for any, casual observer wandering in and being like, what's the subscription service all about? It's not exactly super clear. On that note, you mentioned shows and movies and all that. God of War is going to be an Amazon series, I believe. And there's also the Horizon series coming to Netflix. So there's, the show stuff is cool, but this is next gen console watch, not next gen TV watch. I want more games, man.
But all that's smart marketing, right? Because you get people invested in your properties. Like they did The Last of Us Part 1 last year near the end of the year, and now we have the HBO series. That HBO series is going to work in getting new interest in the Last of Us franchise. So people will go get Part 1, and it's a really smart play on Sony's part to sort of market their own products using their own motion picture studios to create these movies around their properties. And Neil Blomkamp being attached to Gran Turismo 7 is very exciting.
That's an odd one. I personally don't really care about Gran Turismo. Cars are great and everything, but that movie, it seems like a very odd choice. Like Neil Blomkamp has a history of like incredibly high, like just amazingly bespoke sci-fi worlds with incredible design and completely, created from the ground up. And then it's like, here's a story about cars.
Can he make it work?
Yeah. I mean,
that's the question, right?
Yeah. Make me care about Gran Turismo. Do it.
Speaking of hardware, from Sony's own admission, it seems like the supply issues should be pretty much resolved at this point. I would think it's probably now still too early to be expecting any sort of PlayStation 5 Pro revision. Would you agree, Max?
I don't think we're going to see like a Pro revision, but it wouldn't surprise me if we got like a slightly tweaked model. We've heard some sort of muttering about them, adjusting the parts that are inside there. The possibility of like a digital only version, and you can buy the disc part separately. The disc setup. I can imagine that they want more people to buy stuff digitally because that goes directly to them. Whereas, you can buy a used copy of something at Best Buy and they don't really, get a cut of that.
And then for PSVR 2, it's an important launch for Sony. You think having a successful launch and then seeing support throughout the rest of the year is going to be key for part of Sony's strategy for having a successful year?
I mean, that's a small demographic. That's not 30 million people for sure. But I remember buying a PlayStation VR 1 at launch, and I remember there just being kind of a radio silence, and it was, disheartening. Like it was very much this promise of more stuff to come. And eventually there was some really cool stuff on there, but it was kind of a slow trickle out, especially on the sort of, I don't know if it's proper AAA, but on the larger scale VR game front. We got a lot of sort of smaller things dropped here and there, like maybe ports of popular Oculus games. But yeah, I think if they're going to be dropping a $500 headset, there needs to be some like, continued momentum with that to keep people interested in it. And obviously, same goes for their flagship console. Like keep putting out games, keep announcing games. Keep us excited. For those 30 million people, they want to feel like they spent their money well. And for the people who haven't dropped, $550 on a PlayStation at this point, like, make them want to.
What games, what specific titles do you think would be important for Sony to at least announce this year for PSVR 2?
I think Half-Life Alyx would be a huge, killer app.
Yep.
That, I think we gave that a 10 out of 10. I've heard multiple people say that is the Half-Life 3 that people have been waiting for. Some of the best use of VR, period. And, get that in in the hands of, well, I guess on the heads of people who aren't really part of the PC crowd.
People have been really impressed with PSVR 2. Anybody who's tried it has been blown away, expressed a lot of praise for what they've managed to do with the VR headset. My whole thing is VR's niche. Even the Valve headset that was like a rather high price point, I'm not sure what the install base is for VR and how much your profit margin is after all the technology that goes into developing those properties. So you have a small install base, a very high price point at like $500 or $600, I believe, for the PSVR 2, based on when I looked last when I was considering pre-ordering one. That's a tough pill to swallow. A headset that's as expensive, if not more expensive, than the console itself. You definitely are going to have to support it with that in mind.
So, Destin, would you say Xbox still doesn't have much to worry about with PSVR 2?
Not in terms of the VR front, and you have to remember that we still have that Activision case ongoing. I think Sony is going to have an interesting chat with themselves about what they do with their PlayStation Plus subscription service when all those Activision titles drop into Game Pass, assuming this deal closes around April, which is what most analysts are saying will happen, unless the FTC trial, of course, goes to trial, and then it would be likely next year if they go through the whole process. But once every Call of Duty is on Game Pass and Diablo hits Game Pass and all of these things change, Sony's going to have to take a long, hard look at what they're doing with their subscription service and figure out how they're going to have some sort of answer to that huge value proposition that Microsoft will be offering.
We actually ran a poll last week, which is relevant to this discussion. The question we asked the IGN audience was, which of our predictions, we had a big prediction, 2023 prediction episode last week, which of our predictions do you think will actually come true? And the winning result with, how much was it? Almost 40% of the votes was Xbox Game Pass subscription will go up this year. The cost of that will go up this year. But number two, the second most popular prediction was that Sony will acquire Square Enix. Max, how do you personally feel about the likelihood that could happen, or just that Sony might be ready to announce any sort of new acquisition this year?
So we ran a poll on IGN, a big whole showdown thing of the greatest PlayStation characters of all time, and it was funny because of the top 10, well, 3.5 of them weren't Sony exclusive. Like there was Spider-Man, who obviously is a Marvel property, but more importantly, there was Cloud Strife and Lara Croft and Solid Snake, and it's like those are owned by other people, but they're associated so strongly with PlayStation. You know, we've seen Sony being in bed with Square for Final Fantasy stuff, and it would make a ton of sense to scoop that up. We also saw Square Enix unloading a whole bunch of their properties to the Embracer Group. Mm-hmm. So it wouldn't surprise me that much at all if Sony scooped that up. We also heard that they're going to be getting some exclusivity on the Silent Hill 2 remake front, and I could very much see them kind of getting in bed with Konami. You know, maybe that means Metal Gear stuff is exclusive. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe Konami wants to kind of keep all their stuff to themselves. But yeah, I think some acquisitions on Sony's front would be smart. At least in terms of like intellectual property. When you hear a company scooped up a studio that is known for making port, like Blue Point is cool. They've done some amazing ports. The Demon Souls remake was phenomenal. But as far as like what that studio actually makes of their own, there's no IP associated with that studio.
And then the prediction from our poll that came in last place was that all three, Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo, will be at E3 this year. E3 is returning this year after a hiatus. Max, it's been a minute since Sony participated in E3 at all. Do you think that's something that is likely to happen this year, or is even something that would be important for PlayStation?
I would be surprised. I'd be really surprised if they showed up. Yeah, I mean, Sony was pulling out of E3 before E3 was getting canceled for obvious 2020 reasons. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't know. It seems odd. Why would you compete with the messaging of everybody else when you can own the conversation elsewhere? Whether that's a State of Play or doing another PSX PlayStation experience, that would be a nice place to do it.
Well, Destin, before we go, since you won't be on with us next week, I'd love to hear sort of a truncated version of what you think Xbox needs to do this year to make it a good one.
Yeah, well, they need to have their conference or event focused around Starfield. They have announced that that's going to be separate from the one coming January 25th. And really, we need some release dates for their games. We need to see more from the very popular Avowed. We haven't heard anything about Hellblade 2. We still don't have dates for Forza Motorsport, Redfall, and hopefully those come January 25th when we do the developer conference that they're holding. And we just need a clear strategy from Microsoft about exclusive releases to the Xbox ecosystem, because fans are tired of every year saying, oh, it's coming. Okay, well, when? This is the year that's sort of very important for Xbox to get that straightened out.
I agree. This is actually going to be a very important year for both Xbox and PlayStation. Before we go, we've got a poll for you to vote on for next week. What do you think is the single most important thing that Sony needs to do this year? Announce new games, make sure the PSVR 2 launch goes well, update the PlayStation Plus service again. Make sure to vote at IGN.com, and we'll share the results with you next episode. And that's going to do it for this edition of Next Gen Console Watch. Thank you to both Max and Destin. Thank you to everyone working behind the scenes in our LA office here to make this episode possible. My name is Damon. We'll be back next week, 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern, with more PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X news. We'll see you then.